Hey everybody, welcome to our next section of this 10-part or more course. Today we're going to be exploring the concept of living our life with a platform of principles that guide us. So we're going to talk just a minute about morals. I was having a wonderful conversation with a friend the other day, and we talked about two paradigms of living a moral life. And one of the paradigms put emphasis on the ends justify the means, meaning that whatever our end result is, the most people helped justify how we get there. And that's like the Robin Hood principle. That we have Robin Hood who steals from the rich to distribute and redisperse the wealth. So in the end, more people are benefiting. And so there's I believe it's utilitarianism, but I could be wrong, but I'm just going to, maybe utilitarianism puts emphasis on the ends justify the means. And then there's another school of thought that it doesn't matter what the end result is, we must always be 100% moral, meaning we must never lie, we must never steal, it doesn't matter what the situation is, like very black and white. And the reason is because if we lie to save somebody's life one time, then it's a slippery slope that maybe next time we lie just because we need a little bit of help, and then we lie more flexibly. We're more flexible with our morals. So the idea is don't even start. And in both of these structures, whether it's putting emphasis on the ends justify the means, or it doesn't matter the end, the means are the most important, they're both in a way black and white, kind of like a system of rules. Meaning in both situations, we're focusing on a rule that ends justify the means, so I can do this. Or it doesn't matter what, and it doesn't matter what's happening, I'm never acting this way. And in both ways, we almost miss the present moment because we're focused on following a rule. Now, the benefits of following rules, for example, the Ten Commandments or any rule-based system that it's more black and white, like any law system, is that we don't have to think as much on a regular basis. We don't have to consider the present moment and use our intellect and our intuition to say, well, actually, life is gray all the time. What is right for now? We don't have to do that. When we have a rule-based system, we can actually just consult the rules. Nope, can't do that, can't do that. Is it lying? Yes, then I can't do it. And so in a way, it seems easier. And in a way, it is easier in that we can just kind of look at our book and say yes and no. So when we have to make decisions, we can just consult a rule book. Now, the downfalls of that is that a black and white rule book doesn't necessarily match our world, because the truth is that our world on a daily basis is not black and white. It's all color and gray. And it's all in between, and everything is an exception. And that's what our law system tries to adjust for. That's why we have a judicial system that tries to figure out the exceptions. And well, this time it was like this, and this time it was like this. But the truth is every time is an exception because it's always different. There is no black and white. So it's not to say that these law systems or rule systems aren't good or beneficial or valuable. But there's value in them, and then there's downfalls in them as well. And let's talk about how we have an alternative, or what an alternative system could be to fill in those gaps. So what we're going to talk about in today's conversation is value-based systems rather than law or rule-based systems. So law and rule-based systems are more rigid, but therefore more clear and decisive. Which are easier in some ways, but have less wiggle room. And value-based systems have more spaciousness to consider the present moment and to navigate fluidly. However, they're less clear, and so they're much harder to regulate. That's the benefit and downfall. But I find them to be very, very powerful, and in my life, this is how I like to navigate, and so I wanted to share these practices with you. So I'm going to introduce two different value-based systems and the concept of what a value-based system is. and why use it. And so I have two that are already created and are wonderful that you can use. And then I added a few more that I live my life by. And I want to encourage you as a practice at the end of this is to either look at these and say, yeah, I really resonate with these, and I'm going to start maybe trying to live my life this way, or create your own value system. What is important to me and how can I live my life that way? So as we said earlier, the difference between a rule and a value is a guideline rather than a rigid instruction. So for example, we'll start with the 4 agreements. And we're going to do the 5 agreements because they've updated it. But like the 5 agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz and the Toltec people, this beautiful tribe that basically lives their life by these principles, is that there are no rules. There are no, if this happens, then we do this. Rather, it's a guideline to check if you're aligning your behavior with this value. And when we do that, every situation will be slightly different, but we can check to see if we're following and aligning with our values. And if so, then you can do it. But what this allows for is that a value is much more abstract, which allows you many different behaviors that are still aligned with that value. So for example, the first of these principles or agreements is be impeccable with your word. Be impeccable with your word. Now that's asking a lot. But being impeccable with your word means that in this moment, doing my best to be impeccable. Because there's a recognition here that our words are very powerful. How we say things, what we say, and when we say them. Now, this isn't a rule, right? Like be impeccable with your word isn't a rule. It's you should say this. No, it's an idea and a guideline to say, okay, what does that mean right now? Be impeccable with my word. And that could mean that if someone maybe someone says something that hurts you, being impeccable with your word could mean saying, hey, that really hurt my feelings. That could mean letting them know, like, hey, I am really sensitive, and would it be possible for us to change the way we speak to each other? So there are many ways to respond and still be impeccable with your word. Now, obviously, through the book, there's a book called The 4 Agreements, and there's also the 5 Agreements that you can look much deeper into this, and it goes into much detail of what being impeccable with your word really means and why. But we're just going to skim the surface today. So being impeccable with your word is being honest, being open, being transparent, and taking accountability. It's not projecting and blaming others for our experience. Rather, it's taking accountability for my experience and sharing that from a place of love and vulnerability instead of blame and anger and frustration. But, well, we'll get to that in a minute. So that's our first one, be impeccable with your word. The second is don't take anything personally. So not taking anything personally means a deeper recognition that nothing that anybody does is about you. It's always about them. If someone yells at you, it means that they're probably in a hard place, or they're frustrated from something that happened before, or they're reacting to a trauma that happened in the past. And nothing that they are saying is actually about you. Even when it is about you, it's still not about you. It's about their attachment to how they want you to behave. And you're not behaving that way. You're not aligning with how they want to be. So not taking anything personally is almost like a prerequisite that helps us. I mean, these are all intertwined, but it helps us be impeccable with our word, because when you're not taking anything personally, it's much easier to respond rather than to react. So when someone's yelling at you, you're like, wow, they're in a lot of pain. And then you can speak through their words instead of fighting with them. Be impeccable with your word. Don't take anything personally. The next one is don't make assumptions. A lot of our life is based off of rational logic and assumptions. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's okay to assume things, but there are times at which our assumptions are based on reality, and there are times that our assumptions are actually very far from reality because of our past experiences. That we assume what people are thinking or saying or believing because in a past experience we've had a similar situation or a seemingly similar situation, but ultimately in the end our assumption is completely off base. And if we are behaving, responding, and acting out of our assumptions rather than what's actually happening, then we're living in an illusion and we're responding to an illusion or a projection that our mind thinks. So a wonderful way to step around this, not making assumptions, is to check your assumptions. That the mind will project and will make assumptions, but we can just ask somebody if that's what their experience is. Hey, I'm feeling this and this and this. Is that true for you? And in that way, we can actually just check our assumptions, and it makes it so much easier to live our life when someone can say yes or no. And then we can drop the assumption, or we can validate our assumption and then respond in a way that's according to that. The next one is probably the most important, and that's just do your best. Always do your best. And I think that this is a really, really beautiful guideline to live by, because what it's really acknowledging is that being impeccable with your word will always look different. Sometimes it'll be impeccable and sometimes it won't be. Sometimes yelling at somebody because that's where we're at is our best and what we can do, and that's being impeccable with our word. And being impeccable with our word today will look different than tomorrow, because tomorrow I'm depleted and I'm sick and I'm exhausted. And now that's not necessarily an excuse or a rationalization for not growing or not trying to do our best. It's actually the opposite. It's when we recognize that we're always doing our best, it gives us the freedom to let go of the past and to move into the present and into the future, and not getting caught up in guilt and shame of believing that it's a linear experience, that life and our behavior and our learning is linear, because ultimately it's not. Because many different things are happening all the time, and sometimes we feel really great and sometimes we don't feel great, and sometimes someone just said something to us 10 minutes ago that really hurt our feelings and we're in that space, but that's not what happened yesterday. And it's very similar with when we are exercising. We believe that if we lifted 10 pounds yesterday, then we lift 20 tomorrow or in a month. But the truth is that our body is always in a different place. Our mind is always in a different place. And so if we acknowledge that we are always trying our best, then it gives us the freedom to really know that my best is just the best I can do right now. And there's something really powerful about that. We don't have to get caught up in guilt and shame and how we are behaving. The last one is be skeptical and learn to listen. So listening is such a powerful skill. And when we listen deeper than someone's words, when we listen past their words to their intention, to what they really mean underneath, then we actually learn a great deal more when we listen very deeply. But in that, we have this idea of skepticism. I used to have a teacher that said, I have a lot of beliefs and I try not to believe them too much. It's like I'm always skeptical, I'm always questioning, and I'm always open. But all of my openness comes with a tagline at the end of maybe. Maybe that's the truth. Maybe. And I'm always listening for growing and evolving, because when we get caught in believing one thing, then we become very rigid and we don't become open to new ideas and information, because things are always evolving. So always asking questions to your own mind. Just because your mind says something doesn't mean it's the truth. So being skeptical of everything and always questioning everything in a healthy and curious and playful way. So those are the 5 agreements. And that's a paradigm and a holistic system that we can live our life by. Now, obviously, there's other things that we can add in that pertain to different parts of life, but ultimately the idea is this is a holistic system to be able to look at any action at any given time, and I can ask myself, is this aligning with each of the agreements? Am I doing my best right now? And if I'm like, actually, no, I'm not doing my best, okay, I want to do a little bit better, because I'm making an assumption, and I want to check my assumption so I'm not living in a world that is made up in my own head. Or I'm saying, wow, I'm taking this personally right now, and that's why I'm miserable. So I'm going to actually take a minute to ground back down and know that it's not about me. And then I can respond impeccably. I can respond in a way that honors the other person and honors myself, speaking my truth without blaming the other. So that's one system. That's the 4 agreements. And I'll include in this file an overview of both of this holistic systems that I'm giving. So our next system is based on authentic relating. It's ART, authentic relating. It's a wonderful organization that essentially brings another holistic system, a value-based system into our relationships and how we're interacting with the world. And again, it's a way that we can check in with our current behavior and say, is this aligning with my values? And this has a wonderful value system. A lot of them overlap with the four agreements because the four agreements are quite holistic when we really dive into them. And the art principles are as well. So the first one is welcome everything. I really love this one. No matter what's happening, you're welcome. It's welcome here. And that's really saying is accept what's happening. It doesn't mean you don't want to change it. It doesn't mean you can't change it. It doesn't mean you don't want it to be different. But when we start to welcome everything, when we orient ourselves from a space of welcoming and accepting, then our behavior from then is in a different vibration than when we reject something. So acceptance and rejection aren't actions, rather they're ways to receive and vibrations that hold our actions. So if I'm resisting something or if I'm accepting something, my actions will look very different because they're different vibrations where I'm orienting myself from. And the idea of welcome everything is the idea of accepting that this is just what's happening. And from there, I can choose, once I accept, then I can move from there. But I'm moving from there from a space of love and openness and creativity rather than a space of resistance and separateness and blocking and frustration. So it changes the way we act. Welcome everything. The next one is very similar to the four agreements. Assume nothing. That very simply, we live in our assumptions quite often. And when we start to question those assumptions, we can get closer to what's really happening rather than what our mind believes to be happening. The next one is reveal your experience. And this is similar to be impeccable with your word. Reveal your experience is essentially the idea of being accountable and being transparent about what you are experiencing without projecting it onto somebody else. So it's sharing your experience. It's sharing like, I'm feeling hurt right now. There's no blame there. It's not you hurt me. It's I'm feeling hurt and that's important for me to share. Or when I'm sitting with you, I'm feeling love and joy, or I'm feeling fear and frustration. And I think it's because this, and it could be something from my past or something. It's always revealing my own experience within the context of what's happening holistically. Reveal your experience. Think about how much in your life you're having an experience that you don't reveal. This happens all the time, that somebody's hanging out at your house and you are kind of like ready for the experience to be over. You're ready for the connection to like, hey, I kind of want to spend some time alone. But we don't share that and we just sit there and we tolerate an experience because we're not in a place that we're revealing and sharing. And oftentimes when we reveal our experience, especially from a place of not blaming and judging, the response is really powerful. The responses that we get from others when we share our deep, vulnerable experience is very powerful. The next one is own your experience. So this is also connected to be impeccable with your word, but own your experience basically just means be accountable. Be accountable for your own emotions and feelings. When I was a little kid, my mother used to say, nobody can make you feel anything. And that was really frustrating for me because at that time I was I wasn't experiencing that. My sister or a friend would say something and I would be hurt. And I was like, well, they said that and then I got hurt. That means they hurt me. But owning your experience is recognizing that, first of all, I don't need to spend time with anybody that I'm not connecting with and that I don't feel is healthy for me. That's like owning my experience. It's taking accountability for my own behaviors and actions and how I receive things. But also recognizing that a few months ago, there was a guy that I almost hit on my motorbike and he was like, you're an asshole. And I was like, whoa, that was intense. And then I kept driving. And then later that day, I was talking to my partner at the time and she said the same word. She said, you're an asshole. And I took that really personally. I realized that it wasn't somebody saying you're an asshole that hurt me. It's me wanting something from that person. I didn't want anything from the guy I almost hit. And I realized that because I didn't take it personally, like, oh, I'm actually 100% accountable for how I receive this. And in both of these situations, I received it very differently. Or very simply at the grocery store when you're waiting in line, sometimes the line is really long. And if you look at different people in the line, some people are very frustrated because it's really long. And some people are super happy because they're listening to a podcast and it gives them more time to listen to their podcast, which shows that it's really not the external environment that creates our experience. It's how we receive it. And owning your experience is saying, I'm responsible for how I receive life. And when we step into that, it gives us a lot of power of how we navigate. It gives us the power instead of giving the external world the power. Very powerful guideline. The next one is a very important one as well, and that's honor yourself and the other. So what this means is doing what feels good for me while considering that my actions have an effect on those around me and being considerate of those around me. So for example, if I make a commitment that I'm going to spend, that I have a date with somebody tomorrow night, and that day I'm feeling like, wow, I actually am feeling really sick and I don't want to go on this date. So how do I honor myself in that and honor the other person? And what's beautiful is that there are many outcomes of this. There's many behaviors that I can do that still align with this principle. So we'll give two different options just to show the benefit of having these value-based systems. It gives us the spaciousness to act in a way that feels good for us in this moment right now. And there's a lot of freedom in that because it doesn't mean just doing one thing. Even though a lot of us just want an answer, oh, I just want to know exactly what to do. Rather, this system allows us the freedom, but we have to always be navigating. We have to be aware and we have to be conscious of what's happening so that we can actually align ourselves with these values. So, for example, if I made a commitment to go on a date with somebody and I'm not feeling well, there are there's like a million different options, but let's talk about two different options. One option is, first of all, considering the other person. Honoring the other person is letting them know as soon as you know. That's already considering them. Also, considering that you've made an agreement. So recognizing and acknowledging that you made an agreement and considering that your actions from now, since you made an agreement, will affect the other person and being considerate of that. It doesn't, now, there's two pieces here. There's honoring yourself and honoring the other. So honoring the other, if we were only doing that, it would be neglecting my needs and sacrificing my needs because I'm honoring the other person. So I made a commitment, I'm honoring that commitment, and even though I don't feel well, I'm still going to do it. That would only be honoring the other. If I was only honoring myself, it would be not considering the other person by calling them or letting them know. I would just not show up to the experience because I'm honoring myself. Now, in either of these ways, we have an imbalance. But when we're interacting and relating with others, we need to consider both. And there's always a way for me to honor myself while honoring the other. We just have to be creative. We never have to sacrifice our needs and ourselves to benefit someone else because ultimately it's not benefiting them. If I'm not feeling well and I still go on the date, actually we're both suffering. We're both paying a price for that because I don't really want to be there. And they can probably feel that. So one example is calling them and letting them know, hey, I'm not feeling well. Can we reschedule? That's a very simple way to consider the other person while honoring yourself. The next one is letting them know, hey, I'm not feeling well. I'd still love to connect. Would you be open to a Skype date? Or would you be open to coming over here and instead of going out to a restaurant, will you just come bring me some soup and we can have an evening together? So those are two different ways, like very different outcomes that are still honoring the principle of honoring where I am and honoring where they are. And that's a beautiful principle, not sacrificing my needs for others while still being considerate of others' needs. So important. So those principles again are welcome everything, assume nothing, reveal your experience, own your experience, and honor yourself and the other. These are two holistic systems that if you look are slightly different, but are very similar. They cover the same aspects of life, and they're just framed in a slightly different way. They're wonderful paradigms for learning to live our life in a moral and fulfilling way that allows us to navigate reality in a way that considers the highest good for everybody. So I've added just three more that I've actually used in my relationships. So it's very similar in open relating or in sacred relating if you're relating with multiple people, which ultimately we all relate with multiple people, even if not in a sexual way. But we're relating with many people at any given time. We have friends, we have family, we have lovers, we have partners, all these different things require different types of behaviors, but they can use the same principle system. So for these relationships that I have, I've added three more principles that I've noticed in my relationships. So at the beginning of when I started open relating, when I would connect intimately with potentially more than one person at a given time, I realized that I really wanted rules. Okay, if we go to a bar together and you meet someone else, um, what do we do? And in a way, that was much easier to have just this black and white system, but I realized it would never work out that way because there's always something happening that made it more difficult because I was in the bathroom when they met someone, or they weren't planning on meeting somebody, but they just met somebody or whatever. So I realized that the value-based system for relating is so wonderful and beneficial because we can actually live our life by a moral and value code rather than a system of rules. So for relating, I've added explore and relate from wholeness. So when we relate to others, we're putting an emphasis on relating from a place of wanting to share our experience rather than wanting to take or fill from the experience. And basically what that's saying is that we're all whole, and if when we interact with others from a space of not needing anything from them, then this experience becomes the cherry on top instead of the whole cake. And because you're the whole cake. And when you don't need anything from others, it just becomes a bonus. Everything you experience with others becomes a bonus. So that's exploring from wholeness, not exploring from a place of needing to seek or fill something, my own emptiness or my own lack. Doesn't mean I don't feel that. Sometimes I do feel lacking. Sometimes I don't feel 100% whole. But in those moments, I go take time for myself, with myself, and come back to wholeness and then relate from that space. The next one is do what resonates for you in your heart. So I realize that when I make plans with other people, if I'm doing what I want to do, then I care much less if anybody else is with me. So for example, if I invite somebody to go to a restaurant that I love, hey, let's go to a date together and I want to go to this restaurant, and they say yes. And then at the last minute they call me and say, hey, I can't come. If I'm doing what resonates for me anyway, then I'm not so fussed if somebody is canceling at the last minute. Doesn't mean that's the right thing to do. We'll talk, like, that's another conversation. But the idea is if I'm always doing what I love, then I don't start to harbor resentment for others, because I'm doing what I love anyway. So if someone's with me, again, it's a bonus. But I'm not reliant on somebody else to have an experience because I'm already doing what I love. It's when we start sacrificing what we love for the other person that we put more weight on that person to have an experience. And it's a very dangerous game, a very costly game. And the last one is a wonderful principle. It's unconditional love, but conditional relating. And this idea is having unconditional love and compassion for each person, that when somebody says something that isn't very nice to you, is seeing beyond their anger and their frustration and looking deeper at their pain and their hurt and responding from a place of love and unconditional love, of seeing that, wow, in order for them to say something so terrible or so painful or so hurting to me, that they have to be in that state first. They have to generate that pain. So they must be in a lot of pain. And having said that, even though we see where they're coming from and we can have compassion instead of judgment, it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to continue relating with them. And that's the idea of conditional relating. And what conditional relating is basically saying is I have unconditional love toward myself. It's conditional relating says this is how I am open to being treated. And we can have conditional or unconditional love for somebody and still say, hey, I don't want to be treated this way, and so I'm not going to spend time with you anymore. Or I don't want to be treated this way. I'd like to give you the opportunity to bring awareness to this. And if you want to relate to me, this is my standard of relating. And I'll still always love you. But it's just very important for me to be treated in a way that I feel that I deserve, which is like a god, like I deserve to be treated so beautifully with unconditional love as well. And recognizing that not everybody has the ability to do that because of their past traumas and experiences, and having compassion for that, but knowing that you don't necessarily have to tolerate that. So that's unconditional love, but conditional relating. I have unconditional love for the murderer, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go hang out with the murderer. That's the idea. Cool. So we have these value-based systems that are wonderful, and I'm going to attach overviews of all of these. And for the practice, I'll attach some instructions as well of creating your own values. And we can look at different aspects of life, whether it's in relationships in regards to business, that ultimately throughout our entire life, we can have these pillars that relate to everything. So it's so beautiful not having different rule systems for different parts of my life. Rather, wow, in my relationships, I'm always being impeccable with my word. But also in my business agreements, I'm being impeccable with my word. And it relates to every single aspect of life, in my career, in my home life, in my family, in my relationships, and the way I do everything. There's a wonderful idea is the way we do one thing is the way we do everything. So if we can start doing everything with these principles, we'll start to see that our life becomes a very beautiful, fluid, creative art piece. And it becomes much simpler and holistic. Instead of having different sections of our life, we actually just have one value system that permeates all of our life. And there's something quite beautiful about that. So let's take a few deep breaths, and we'll do 3 deep inhales and 3 ohms at the end of the inhale. And we'll end with Hari Om Tat Sat. So let's just take 2 deep breaths and just kind of receive everything that was given today. Trusting that whatever needs to land will land. We'll do 3 ohms together. Deep inhale. Hari Om Tat Sat. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your openness and for your life and the values you live your life by. I encourage you to begin this incredible and beautiful journey of planting these new values and seeing how they relate to each part of your life and seeing what values feel right for you and how you want to live your life. We have the ability to live an incredible, beautiful, moral, fulfilling, lovely, luscious, and vibrant life. And these values can help us make that so much cleaner and clearer so that we can see at any given moment if I'm living to my highest self. So thank you so much for listening. And I will include both a value workshop where we can, or value exercise, but also another exercise where we can look at our inherent values. So it's actually, well, I'm going to talk for 2 more minutes because I totally forgot about this and it's really important. So we have 2 ways to make value systems. One is by literally saying, okay, what's valuable to me and what do I want to live my life by? And we can pick and choose from these other paradigms. But one beautiful way is, and I'll attach a workshop on this as well, is by going through our daily life, the activities that we do every day. I brush my teeth every day. I eat every day. I talk to my friends every day. We look at what we do every day. we look at what we do every week and we look at what we do every month, and we get about 5 or 10 activities. And then we ask in each activity, why do I do this? Why do I brush my teeth? Hygiene and caring for my body. And I see that one of my values over and over and over again, wow, I brush my teeth every day, I exercise every day, I do meditation every day, and all of these are a desire to care for my body. So a value of mine is caring for my body, and treating my body well, and keeping it clean. So that could be a value, that I always want to care for my body. And whatever that means in the given moment, does that mean having a piece of cake? Sometimes yes, it's caring for my body because it's giving me, connection, and it gives me happiness and joy. But eating a piece of cake at 8 a.m. is different than eating a piece of cake at midnight. Is different than eating a piece of cake, and each kind of cake is different, and so it gives us the freedom to really look at the situation and be able to choose, how can I honor my body right now? Or another value is wanting to be connected to community. So maybe this piece of cake is allowing me to connect with people that I love, and that's important right now, and it's more important for me than treating my body well. Or maybe I can do both. Anyway, so there's another exercise there. So I'll give two exercises for this next week. Thank you guys for listening. Hari Om Tat Sat. Big love to everybody.